Hi, morning everyone. So as Katherine Brickell mentioned, I'm Mel Nowicki. I am working on the Debt Trap project, which is the sister arm of Sensory Lives. So I'm not going to keep you for too long. I'm just going to kind of update you on the project, which culminated in a book, which you'll have flyers for on the table, discounted if you're interested. All author proceeds go to surviving economic abuse. So I'll give you a brief update on that side of the project and then tell you a bit more about what we're doing next in relation to allocation policies and trying to make some change there. Down. Cool. Okay, so me and Katherine published a book. After we've been working with the Shared Health Foundation since 2022 on this project, which broadly explores the intersections between debt, temporary accommodation and domestic abuse. So we worked with Shared Health clients to understand their homelessness journeys into TA, sometimes out of TA, depending on the participant, but particularly through that lens of debt. Domestic abuse wasn't actually an initial thread of the project, but very quickly became extremely clear that we can't talk about homelessness and debt without talking about domestic abuse, and particularly economic abuse. You know, money is such a powerful tool that perpetrators use to hold power over victim survivors of domestic abuse, and that really came through in our research. So the book kind of traces how debt is unsurprisingly a major cause of homelessness through rent arrears, and particularly with that kind of lens of economic abuse in terms of perpetrators withholding access to money, lying about rental payments and other kind of bill payments, and so on. The book then thinks about or explores women's experiences of debt once they are in TA and in the homelessness system, and just how much debt compounds in that time period, through things like living in a hotel room with no kitchen and having no resources to cook and having to rely on kind of expensive takeaways, maybe having to buy new school uniforms for your children because you've been moved out of area, or conversely having to pay astronomical home-to-school travel costs to try and maintain your children's sense of stability. During this difficult time, we met parents who were paying in excess of £300 a month to get their kids to and from school. I could go on. The costs of cleaning uninhabitable TA and making the decision between, okay, I've got this last 15 quid, do I spend it on cleaning products to make it habitable, or do I go out and buy some more food? Those are the kind of minute in financial terms, but having these huge detrimental effects on women's lives. And the book also then traces the kind of afterlives of homelessness. So for some of our participants, they were now in permanent social housing, but the kind of what we call the debt trap didn't end there. The kind of the spools continued post period of homelessness. For example, through the tearing up of the removal of flooring between tenancies, so turning up in your new home only to find bare concrete floors that you then have to somehow deal with, which often means taking on more debt, more credit. Again, the kind of the poor quality of a lot of social housing. I'm sure I'm speaking to a room who are very familiar with all of these issues. All of this kind of contributing to debt, so we kind of trace that story through the book. Yes, as well as the book, alongside the book's publication, we've also been publishing op-eds talking about various aspects, specific aspects of the book. So we've got op-eds in the big issue, Inside Housing, and Housing Quality magazine at the moment on various aspects. One, the Housing Quality magazine piece is on allocation specifically. So if you're interested in a very quick overview of the book, then do take a look there as well. So this is large. We also had a launch event at the Centre for Social Justice. Sorry, the book was published on World Homeless Day, I should say, which was the 10th of October. We had our launch event on the 13th of October. at the Centre for Social Justice, inviting kind of policymakers, MPs, practitioners, kind of academics, so it was quite a nice mixed bag. Laura was kindly our amazing MC and chair of the evening. And then we also had speakers, Kwejo Twenoboa, Polly Mackenzie, and then one of our participants, Christina Arkham, came to talk about her lived experience as well. So it was a really great night that I think really kind of pushed the point of the book. Am I talking too close into this? Yeah, I mean, I would be here for a lot longer than 10 minutes if I was talking you through the book in real detail, but I suppose our overarching point, and the point that we really pushed and emphasised at our launch event last month, was that these debts are part of a systemic state failing. They are not the fault of women themselves, and so often we still talk about debt as something as individual responsibility, as a lack of money management skills. But again, I'm sure I'm speaking to a room who know that there is nobody with stronger, more coherent money management skills than people who have no money, because every penny has to be considered and thought through. And the overarching message of our book is that it is not women who are failing here, it's women who are being failed at scale, in many ways, layer upon layer, various kind of state services that are supposed to be supporting women are more often than not failing them in these circumstances. Okay, so what we've been kind of driving next from our initial research with shared health clients and the book has been disqualification rules in social housing allocation policies. So 88% of local authorities disqualify households in housing-related debt. Usually that means rent arrears, but some local authorities can be more punitive than that and can encompass a wide range of debts. We know this because our colleague Fraser Curry, big shout out to Fraser because this was a painstaking job, analysed every English local authority allocation policy, all 294, so that's excluding county councils, to ascertain this. And we also did some FOI work to try and ascertain how many families in a single month, so December 2023, were trapped in temporary accommodation because of these housing-related debt rules, and found that in 1 month alone, nearly 4,000 families were trapped in TA as a consequence of these rules. So usually because they're in rent arrears or other forms of housing-related debt, they are not able to access a bidding number. They can't, they're not eligible for social housing allocation. So this was something that came up in our original body of research, and we were interested to follow it through further because it's so clearly another mechanism that's trapping families in TA for even longer, therefore even more opportunity is the wrong word, right? It sounds far too positive, but the longer you're in TA, the longer debts accrue, the longer you're then trapped because you have this housing-related debt that you can't pay off, and so the cycle goes on. As one of our participants put it, you can't bid because you're in the red. So this is what we've been kind of following through a bit more with this FOI work and with the policy analysis work. Again, something that we found in our research was that this acutely impacts survivors of domestic abuse whose debts are often accrued as a very part of that abuse. So essentially being trapped in and your homelessness being extended as a consequence of your domestic of your abuse, of the actions of your perpetrator. So whilst we found that the vast majority of housing allocation policies do mention domestic abuse in the policy, less than 1 in 5 only specifically state they exempt victims from housing-related debt rules. And even that 70% is a little bit patchy because some of the language can be very vague. For example, referencing harassment rather than specifically kind of domestic abuse. So even within that kind of gold standard, as it were, 17%, it's still a very kind of patchy picture. There are very, very few local authorities that really clearly outline exempting domestic abuse survivors from these housing allocation rules. So, on that basis, we have been looking to push for regulatory change. We've been working with barristers to develop kind of best practice of regulatory change, kind of the wording for regulatory change, and we've had conversations with MHCLG on this, and we're going to be kind of pushing harder for this in the coming months to exempt all domestic abuse survivors from these housing-related debt rules within allocation policies. In our conversations with barristers, they were very confident that if you're a domestic abuse survivor and you are disqualified from an allocation list and your debts were accrued as a direct consequence of domestic abuse, then that is unlawful under the Equality Act as well. So there's lots of kind of there's some hopeful momentum here. Something else we're kind of hopefully trying to piggyback on is the recent earlier in the year exemption for the local connection requirements for domestic abuse survivors, which became regulation earlier in the year. So we're hoping to kind of use that as incentive to add this exemption for domestic abuse survivors on the basis of housing-related debt. We're starting with domestic abuse survivors. I mean, I think that these rules are extremely problematic across the board, but as a first step, it feels like a clear-cut argument to make. So we're running with it. So as well as on the national, so we're trying to push for that kind of national regulatory change, but we're also trying to work on the local scale as well. So we are currently working on a best practice guide with our colleagues at the Chartered Institute of Housing. I'm sure my colleague, Steph, will be really pleased to be up on this photo, which is going to provide kind of a best practice for local authorities who are looking to kind of to better support domestic abuse survivors, including child survivors of domestic abuse, within their housing policies. So we're pushing for exemption for domestic abuse survivors on these housing-related debt allocation policies on that kind of individual local authority level. We're also encouraging things like prevention in the form of debt rent arrears write-off. Some of these allocation policies dictate that if you're in as little as £250 worth of rent arrears, you're struck from the list. And I mean, it makes no moral sense, and it certainly doesn't make any economic sense either when we consider, in London alone, it's £5.5 million a day being spent on TA, and people are being trapped in this, in these accommodations for as little as £250 worth of rental arrears. So, as well as writing that report, we have various kind of meetings coming up with interested local authorities who are kind of looking to have conversations about changing their allocation policies kind of across the country. We've been invited to the London Assembly allocations kind of committee. We've submitted evidence alongside Rosalie and Catherine's submission on kind of neurodivergent aspects. But we're also going to this committee meeting to give kind of further evidence and give our expertise next month. So there seems like there's some appetite for change there. And then we're also looking at opportunities around district councils all becoming kind of unitary authorities in the next few years. So all of those affected local authorities are going to have to be writing their new allocation policies, and we see this as quite a good opportunity to start shoving this in their hands. So again, if anyone has any kind of contacts or knowledge or advice in that area, it is hugely appreciated. Right. Okay, I'll stop in a second. So, I guess why have we focused on allocation policies? It's quite kind of technical and specific, I suppose, but something that really came up in our research and something that one of our participants, Jenna, so kind of eloquently put it, is that yes, there's this kind of big mountain of these huge systemic problems that feed into why TA is just so rampant and seemingly out of control right now. But we also need to think about the kind of the ledges, i.e. the kind of small stepping stones and means of support that we can provide mothers and children in TA with. And Katherine and I really see allocation policies as one of these ledges, you know, that hopefully will kind of plug into that bigger systemic change as well. So we're really trying to kind of push the national and local levels. And yes, I will stop. There's a QR code for the book as well, but you've got flyers. Yes, thanks for listening and looking forward to the rest of the day.
I think over today we're going to find lots of bits of work that are pushing towards systemic solutions, and it's going to be really great picture to build. And I think this work around neurodiverse children and the effect on their housing, on their health, and also the debt work is phenomenally powerful. The book is really readable. Like, I know it's been written by professors and academics, but it's genuinely a good read. It took me kind of 3 hours on a train. I sat there with like my mouth open. Brilliant storytelling in it, really good description of the actual system that these families are stuck in. So if you feel like you need to have some more knowledge, get the book. And it's not totally depressing. Like, I know a lot of this world is really depressing, but it's actually a solid read.